The sky above the ruins of Japan was not a sky at all. It was a churning, apocalyptic bruised tapestry of crimson and ash. The air tasted of ozone, pulverized concrete, and the metallic tang of copper. Izuku Midoriya stood at the epicenter of the wasteland, his lungs pulling in ragged, shallow breaths that burned like swallowed glass. His hero costume, the Gran Torino cape, the meticulously upgraded armor plates, the iron saws, was reduced to scorched, tattered rags clinging to his battered physique. His right arm hung uselessly at his side, a mottled canvas of deep violet and black bruises, while blood poured from a gash above his left eye, half blinding him. 100 yards away, floating amidst a maelstrom of decaying matter, was Tamura Shigaraki. The villain was no longer merely human. He was an amalgamation of stolen quirks, a singularity of pure, unadulterated hatred and destruction. Shigaraki's eyes, manic and glowing with the oppressive weight of all for one, locked onto Izuku. It ends here, Midoriya. Shigaraki's voice was a multi-layered cacophony of stolen voices, echoing across the devastated landscape. Everything you've built, everything your precious society stands for, it turns to dust today. Izuku didn't respond with words. He couldn't. He was running on the absolute dregs of his stamina, his body held together by nothing more than sheer, terrifying willpower. Inside the metaphysical realm of his soul, the vestiges of One for All were shouting, their voices a desperate chorus of warnings. Ninth, your body can't take any more. Yoichi's voice pleaded. If you draw out any more, you won't just break your bones, you'll tear your own existence apart. Let him do it, the second user argued, his voice grim. If we don't stop him here, there won't be a world left to protect. Izuku closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He saw the faces of his friends. Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, Bakugo. He saw his mother. He saw Eri. He saw the countless innocent lives huddled in evacuation shelters, praying for a miracle. He opened his eyes. They glowed with an incandescent, ethereal green light that pierced through the suffocating gloom of the battlefield. Sparks of emerald lightning began to arc off his skin, snapping and hissing as they grew in intensity. He didn't have a choice. He was the symbol of peace. Even if it meant his end, he would not let Shigaraki take another step. One for all. Izuku whispered, the sound lost in the roar of the decaying wind. He pulled it all. Not just the physical stockpile of power, but the very conceptual weight of the quirk. The hopes, the dreams, the sacrifices of 8 generations before him. He pulled it from his core, bypassing the mental limiters, bypassing the physical safeguards. 1,000,000%. The green lightning turned blindingly white. The sheer output of energy began to warp the space around him. The air crackled with a sound like shattering glass. Reality itself began to groan under the paradoxical weight of a power that was never meant to exist in a mortal vessel. Shigaraki laughed, a sound of pure madness, and unleashed a tidal wave of decay, a tsunami of gray death meant to annihilate the entire continent. Izuku lunged forward, his legs propelling him at speeds that broke the sound barrier instantly, creating a vacuum that pulled the debris into his wake. He reeled his unbroken left arm back. The energy coalescing around his fist was so dense it looked like a miniature star. United States of Smash. His fist met the absolute center of Shigaraki's decay wave. There was no sound at first. Just a blinding flash of chromatic light as two absolute, unstoppable forces collided. For a microsecond, the world held its breath. Then, reality broke. It didn't explode, it shattered. A massive fissure in the fabric of space-time tore open at the point of impact. It looked like a jagged wound in the air, bleeding hues of violet, pitch black, and starry silver. The kinetic energy of Izuku's punch didn't just overpower Shigaraki. It overwhelmed the physical laws of the universe. The backdraft was instantaneous. A gravitational anomaly birthed from the tear violently pulled everything inward. Shigaraki screamed as the wave of kinetic energy physically blasted him out of the singularity's pull, launching the villain miles away, unconscious and broken, his decay neutralized. But Izuku, carried by the momentum of his own godlike strike, plunged directly into the heart of the rift. Ninth. The collective scream of the vestiges echoed in his mind one final time before the deafening roar of the void swallowed him whole. Izuku felt himself being stretched, torn, and compressed all at once. Colors he had never seen flashed before his eyes. He felt the chilling sensation of 1,000 different worlds brushing past his consciousness. He tried to reach out, to activate Black Whip, to anchor himself to something, anything, but the connection to One for All was suddenly, violently muffled, like trying to hear a whisper through 10 feet of solid water. Pain, absolute and all-consuming, hijacked his nervous system. His body, having just unleashed the greatest punch in human history, finally gave out. The void twisted one last time, spitting him out like an unwanted spark. Izuku Midoriya plummeted through an alien sky, a streak of fading green lightning, before crashing brutally into a mountain of snow and jagged ice. Darkness claimed him. Cold. It was the first sensation to pierce through the thick, heavy veil of unconsciousness. Not the crisp, refreshing cold of a winter morning in Mizurifu, but a biting, malicious cold that felt as though it were actively trying to gnaw through his flesh and freeze his marrow. Izuku gasped, his eyes snapping open. Instantly, a choir of agonizing pain erupted across his entire body. His left arm was numb, his right arm throbbed with the familiar, sickening pulse of shattered bones, and his ribs felt as though they had been crushed in a vice. He tried to sit up, but his muscles screamed in protest, forcing him to roll onto his side with a ragged cough. Snow. He was lying in a deep snowbank. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the blurry edges of his vision. As his eyes adjusted, the environment slowly came into focus. He was surrounded by towering, jagged pine trees heavily laden with snow. Looming in the distance were colossal, sheer mountains of dark gray rock, their peaks disappearing into a sky perpetually choked by iron-gray clouds. The wind howled through the crags, a lonely, mournful sound. Where? Izuku croaked, his voice raw and raspy. He forced himself to his hands and knees, shivering violently. His hero costume was gone. The reinforced polymer, the impact-resistant padding, all completely disintegrated by the rift. He was clad only in his skin-tight, sleeveless black undersuit, which was torn in several places, exposing his heavily scarred arms and chest to the biting frost. His boots remained miraculously intact, though they were scuffed beyond recognition. Panic, cold and sharp, began to pool in his stomach. Shigaraki. The war. Everyone. He closed his eyes and reached inward, desperately searching for the familiar warmth of One for All. He found it, but it was different. The roaring bonfire of energy that had coursed through his veins for the past year was reduced to a flickering, dying ember. The voices of the past users were entirely absent, replaced by a haunting, hollow silence. He could still feel the raw, kinetic power locked within that ember, but trying to draw upon it felt like trying to pull water from a dry well. No. No, 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 Izuku muttered, forcing himself to his feet. He leaned heavily against the trunk of a massive pine tree, his breath pluming in the freezing air. I have to get back. I have to. He took a step forward and nearly collapsed as a wave of dizziness washed over him. His body was on the absolute brink of failure. He looked around. The landscape was utterly foreign. The flora didn't match the Japanese mountains. The air smelled different, devoid of the pollutants of modern cities, smelling only of ancient stone, pine, and something metallic. Blood. Izuku's head snapped up. Danger sense, one of the few quirks that still felt somewhat active, albeit muted and buzzing like a broken radio, suddenly flared in the back of his skull. It wasn't the sharp, stabbing pain he was used to when facing villains. It was a dull, oppressive throb, as if the very environment around him was steeped in malice. A scream pierced the howling wind. It was high-pitched, terrified. Human. Izuku didn't think. The pain in his shattered limbs, the freezing cold, the utter lack of his full quirk, none of it mattered. His legs moved on their own. The core tenet of his soul, the unyielding drive that had impressed All Might on that fateful day under the bridge, ignited. Someone is in trouble. He pushed off the tree, his boots crunching loudly in the deep snow as he broke into a clumsy, agonizing sprint toward the source of the scream. High above the snow-choked valleys of the fractured peaks, standing upon a precipice of black stone overlooking the desolate expanse, stood the Mother of Sanctuary, Lilith. She was a vision of terrifying, majestic beauty. Towering well over 7 feet tall, her skin was a pale, flawless alabaster that contrasted sharply with the chaotic darkness around her. From her brow curled magnificent, obsidian horns, sweeping back like a crown of natural sovereignty. Her eyes were pools of molten gold, ancient and unfathomable. From her back extended a pair of breathtaking wings, composed not of feathers or leathery bat skin, but of flesh and bone draped in millions of ethereal, blood-red petals that gently fell and dissolved into the wind. She wore robes of deep crimson and shadow, garments that seemed to flow and shift like coagulated blood. She had returned. Summoned back to the mortal realm by the scholar Elias, she was finally free from the abyss of the void. Sanctuary, the world she had created alongside the angel Anarius to be a refuge from the eternal conflict, was dying. Her children, humanity, were weak, squabbling, and blind. They worshipped the very angels that viewed them as abominations, and feared the demons that sought to consume them. No longer, Lilith thought, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. I will show them the truth. I will sever their chains. Only the strong will survive the coming war, but they will be free. She was currently traveling through the peaks, visiting the isolated parishes and towns, planting the seeds of her philosophy. She awakened the latent desires in their hearts, stripping away the dogma of the Cathedral of Light. She watched as they embraced their true natures, some with beauty, some with horrific, bloody violence. It was necessary. The chaff had to be separated from the wheat. Suddenly, Lilith paused. Her wings twitched, a flurry of crimson petals swirling around her ankles. She turned her gaze eastward, toward a particularly dense section of the frozen woods. A ripple had passed through the metaphysical fabric of Sanctuary. It was a sensation so profound, so jarring, that it made the ancient demoness narrow her eyes in suspicion. It wasn't a prime evil. It lacked the sulfuric, suffocating stench of hatred, destruction, or terror. It wasn't an archangel. It lacked the arrogant, sterile hum of high heaven's light. It was something entirely alien. A concentrated mass of raw, kinetic willpower. It felt human, yet possessed a magnitude of power that rivaled the ancient Nephilim of old. But what intrigued Lilith the most was the flavor of the energy. There was no malice in it. No sin. In the world of Sanctuary, every human soul was tainted by the inherent mingling of angelic and demonic blood. Every soul held the capacity for great evil and great good. But this anomaly, it felt absurdly pure. It felt like a blinding, unwavering beacon of self-sacrifice. It was a light so intense it bordered on madness. How curious, Lilith murmured, her voice a silken, echoing timbre that seemed to command the very air itself. She stepped off the precipice. Instead of falling, she drifted, her petal wings catching the magical currents as she glided effortlessly over the jagged terrain, moving silently toward the source of the disturbance. Izuku crested a snow-covered ridge and dropped to his stomach, peering down into a small clearing. What he saw made his blood run cold, freezing him in place more effectively than the frigid air. It was a small traveling caravan. 2 wooden carts, pulled by large, shaggy beasts of burden, were overturned and burning, the flames licking hungrily at the falling snow. But it wasn't the fire that horrified Izuku. It was the attackers. They were monsters straight out of a nightmare. Bipedal, heavily muscled, and covered in matted brown fur, they possessed the heads of twisted, demonic goats. Their eyes burned with a feral, mindless bloodlust. They wielded crude, rusted halberds and massive cleavers. Izuku had fought Noma. He had fought beings whose bodies had been genetically mutilated beyond recognition. But the Noma were tragic. They were victims of science and a madman's quirk. These creatures, these were different. They reeked of ancient, primordial evil. They were the Katsura, the blood clan of the Fractured Peaks, though Izuku didn't know their name. He only knew they were slaughtering innocent people. 4 guards lay dead in the snow, their bodies brutally mangled. In the center of the wreckage, backed against an overturned cart, was a woman clutching a young boy to her chest. She was weeping, holding a small iron dagger with a shaking hand as 3 of the goat beasts slowly circled her, chittering and bleating in a guttural, terrifying language. One of the Katsura raised its massive cleaver, preparing to bring it down on the woman and her child. Izuku didn't strategize. He didn't assess his own broken body. No! The scream ripped from his throat as he pushed off the ridge. He drew upon the flickering ember in his chest. It sputtered, fighting him, but he forced it to ignite. One for all, full cowl. 5%. Faint, emerald lightning crackled across his bruised skin. It was pathetic compared to his usual output, barely enough to enhance his physical strength, but it had to be enough. He launched himself through the air, clearing the distance in a single, desperate bound. The Katsura bringing down the cleaver didn't even have time to register the green flash before Izuku's iron-soled boot collided with its snout. Shoot style, St. Louis smash. The impact sounded like a cannon shot. The goatman's neck snapped backward with a sickening crunch, and the massive beast was launched 20 feet through the air, crashing through a burning cart and lying still. Izuku landed in a crouch, sliding in the blood-stained snow. He immediately threw his arms out, placing himself firmly between the terrified mother and the remaining monsters. He was panting heavily, his breath visible in the freezing air, the emerald lightning desperately trying to stay alive around his frame. The woman behind him gasped, her eyes wide with shock. She had expected an angel of the cathedral, or perhaps a wandering rogue. Instead, a boy half naked in the freezing cold, glowing with green magic and covered in terrifying scars, had fallen from the sky. The two remaining Katsura paused, staring at their fallen comrade. Then, their eyes locked onto Izuku. They threw back their heads and let out a deafening, blood-curdling roar, raising their weapons. "Run," Izuku said, glancing over his shoulder at the woman. His voice was steady, despite the agony tearing through his nerves. "Get as far away as you can. I'll hold them off." "But," the woman stammered, clutching her child. "They are the Blood Clan. They will tear you apart." "I am a hero," Izuku replied, his green eyes burning with an intensity that made the woman flinch. "I won't let them hurt you. Go!" The woman didn't argue further. She scrambled to her feet and ran toward the treeline. The Katsura charged. Izuku took a deep breath. Without the high percentages of One for All, he couldn't rely on brute force or shockwaves to blow them away. He had to rely on his foundational martial arts, his agility, and his analytical mind. The first goatman swung its rusted halberd in a wide, horizontal arc aimed at Izuku's waist. Izuku ducked beneath the heavy blade, feeling the wind of the swing ruffle his hair. He stepped inside the creature's guard. His right arm was broken, rendering it useless, so he pivoted on his heel and delivered a devastating, spinning back kick with his iron sole into the creature's knee joint. Bone shattered. The Katsura roared in pain, dropping to one knee. Izuku didn't hesitate. He channeled the 5% power into his unbroken left arm, pulled back, and delivered a precise, twisting uppercut directly under the creature's jaw. The force lifted the massive beast off the ground, sending it crashing onto its back, unconscious. 2 down, Izuku thought, his lungs burning. 1L. Danger sense spiked, a sudden, blinding headache that made Izuku wince. He threw himself to the side just as the third Katsura brought its cleaver down exactly where he had been standing, burying the heavy iron blade deep into the frozen earth. Izuku scrambled backward, but his foot caught on the debris of the cart. He tripped, falling hard onto his back. The snow was freezing against his bare skin. The goatman wrenched its cleaver free from the dirt. It looked down at the boy, its yellow eyes filled with sadistic glee. It raised the weapon high above its head. Izuku raised his left arm to block, knowing full well the blade would cleave right through his flesh and bone. He tried to summon One for All, to push it to 10%, 20%, but the ember refused. It was drained. "I'm sorry, All Might," Izuku thought, gritting his teeth. Suddenly, the air pressure in the clearing dropped precipitously. The wind stopped howling. The flames on the burning carts froze in place, as if time itself had been suspended. A scent washed over the clearing, a heavy, intoxicating perfume of ancient iron, crushed roses, and dark magic. The Katsura froze, its cleaver held high. The feral gleam in its eyes vanished, instantly replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. It didn't look at Izuku. It was looking at something behind him. The beast dropped its weapon. It took a step back, letting out a pitiful, whimpering bleat. It turned to run. It didn't make it 2 steps. A spike of solid, crystallized blood erupted from the ground beneath the Katsura, impaling the beast straight through its chest. The creature didn't even have time to scream as it was hoisted into the air, its dark blood cascading down the crystalline spike to stain the snow below. Izuku stared in absolute shock. The brutal, Instantaneous lethality of the attack was entirely foreign to him. A shadow fell over him. Izuku rolled over, pushing himself up on his trembling left arm. He looked up, and his breath hitched in his throat. She was the most imposing figure he had ever seen. Taller than All Might, radiating an aura of power that felt entirely different from All for One's suffocating malice. This power was ancient, regal, and deeply, deeply sorrowful. Her blood-red petal wings cascaded behind her like a living cloak. Her golden eyes looked down at him, analytical and piercing. Izuku's hero instincts told him to fight. To stand up. This being was clearly the apex predator of this environment. She had just casually slaughtered a monster with blood magic, but his body had nothing left to give. The adrenaline faded, and the accumulated exhaustion of fighting Shigaraki, shattering reality, and battling the Katsura finally caught up with him. His vision tunneled. The glowing green sparks of One for All flickered and died completely. He collapsed face first into the snow. Lilith stood perfectly still, watching the strange boy fall unconscious at her feet. She did not normally concern herself with the solitary skirmishes of mortals. The wilds of Sanctuary were brutal. If a human could not survive the Katsura, they were not worthy of the new world she was building. But this boy... Lilith stepped closer, her bare feet making no sound on the snow. She looked down at him. He was young, perhaps 16 or 17 of his years. His body, clad only in strange, torn black fabric, was a tapestry of horrific scars. Some looked like surgical scars, others like the result of unimaginable blunt force trauma. Yet he had thrown himself in front of a Katsura to protect a weak, fleeing woman he did not know. He had fought with a physical prowess that defied his mortal frame, wielding a strange, emerald energy that felt entirely detached from the magic of Sanctuary. Lilith knelt gracefully, the crimson fabric of her gown pooling in the snow. She reached out a pale, perfectly manicured hand and gently brushed a lock of messy green hair from the boy's forehead. The moment her skin made contact with his, a spark of that strange green energy leaped from his pores. It didn't attack her. It wrapped around her finger, humming with a warm, comforting vibration. Lilith gasped softly, her golden eyes widening in genuine shock. For a fraction of a second she felt it. She felt the boy's soul. It was overwhelming. It was a chaotic, burning inferno of pure hope. There was no darkness, no desire for power, no hidden ambition. There was only an agonizingly desperate need to save others. It was a light so bright it made the angels of the high heavens look like hypocritical shadows. It was beautiful. And it was incredibly, tragically naive. Such a spirit, Lilith thought, her mind racing. In a world like Sanctuary, a spirit like this would be devoured in days. The prime evils would delight in breaking him. The heavens would chain him as a weapon. She looked at his shattered right arm. He had broken himself for a stranger. He had wielded power that tore his own flesh apart just to protect the weak. A strange, unfamiliar emotion fluttered in the dark abyss of Lilith's chest. It wasn't the maternal, predatory possessiveness she usually felt for her human followers. It was something akin to fascination, perhaps even reverence. He is not of this world, she realized. He is a stranger, untouched by the sin of the eternal conflict. A blank canvas of pure willpower. If she could harness him. If she could temper that blinding, self-sacrificial light with the pragmatic, brutal reality of survival, what a magnificent weapon he would make for her cause. He could be the symbol her people needed. A beacon of strength that wasn't corrupted by the dogma of Anarius or the madness of hell. Elias, Lilith spoke, her voice carrying through the wind. From the shadows of the treeline, a pale, bald man in the robes of a Horadric scholar stepped forward. He bowed deeply, not daring to look directly at the mother. I am here, blessed mother. Bring him, Lilith commanded, standing up and turning away from the carnage. Handle him with the utmost care. If he perishes on the journey, I will flay your soul. Elias looked up, his eyes widening as he took in the battered, scar-covered boy lying in the snow. A mortal, mother? Why? Lilith paused, glancing over her shoulder. Her petal wings rustled, shedding a cascade of blood-red flora into the white snow. A small, enigmatic smile curled the corners of her dark lips. He is no mere mortal, Elias. He is a spark of absolute light in our universe of shadows. And I intend to fan that spark into a flame that will burn the heavens to ash. Consciousness returned to Izuku Midoriya not as a sudden awakening, but as a slow, agonizing crawl out of a deep, dark well. The first thing he registered was the smell. It wasn't the sterile scent of Recovery Girl's infirmary, nor the familiar smell of his dorm room. It was thick, intoxicating, and heavy, the scent of burning myrrh, rich spices, iron, and a faint, sweet metallic tang that he inherently recognized as blood. The second thing he registered was the bed. He was lying on something incredibly soft, covered in heavy, silken furs that trapped his body heat. The pain was still there, a constant dull roar in the background, but it had been severely muted. His right arm felt tightly bound, immobilized against his chest. He slowly fluttered his eyes open. The room, no, it wasn't a room, it was a massive, opulent tent, was bathed in the dim, flickering light of dozens of thick wax candles scattered around the perimeter. The walls were draped in heavy tapestries of deep crimson and black, depicting abstract, swirling patterns that made Izuku slightly dizzy to look at. He tried to push himself up with his left arm. A sharp jolt of pain shot through his ribs, causing him to hiss and fall back against the pillows. You should not move, little spark. The voice caused Izuku's heart to skip a beat. It was smooth, melodic, and held an undercurrent of absolute, terrifying authority. It was a voice that commanded obedience simply by existing. Izuku turned his head. Sitting in an ornate, high-backed wooden chair a few feet from the bed was the woman from the snowy clearing. Up close, without the chaotic adrenaline of battle clouding his vision, she was even more striking. She was incredibly tall. Even seated, she seemed to loom over the space. Her pale skin caught the candlelight, making her look almost ethereal. The massive, obsidian horns curling from her forehead cast long, demonic shadows against the tent walls. She wore a more casual garment now, a flowing robe of dark silk that left her shoulders bare, though her back was still enveloped by the shifting, shedding cascade of blood-red petal wings. She was looking at him with an expression of intense, calculated curiosity. She held a goblet of dark wine in one hand, swirling it slowly. Izuku's mind raced. Villain? A mutant quirk? Where am I? Did Shigaraki send me to a base? No. The Katsura. The snow. That magic she used. Who are you? Izuku managed to croak out. His throat felt like sandpaper. Where am I? The woman smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. She set her goblet down on a side table and leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. You are in the Fractured Peaks, in the world of Sanctuary, she said softly. As for who I am, I have many names. The daughter of hatred. The creator of Sanctuary, but to the people of this world I am simply Mother. She stood up, her immense height forcing Izuku to crane his neck upward. She stepped to the side of the bed, looking down at him. I am Lilith. Izuku stared at her. The name meant nothing to him, but the aura she projected meant everything. Danger Sense wasn't screaming, but it was humming with a low, constant vibration, warning him that he was in the presence of an entity of godlike power. My name, Izuku started, swallowing hard to moisten his throat, is Izuku Midoriya. I'm a hero from UA High School. I don't know how I got here. A hero, Lilith tasted the word, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. Yes. I saw you fight the Katsura. You wield a magic I have never felt in all my millennia of existence. It is not of heaven, and it is not of hell. And your body, she reached out. Izuku flinched, but he was too weak to move away. Lilith's cold, smooth fingers gently traced the massive, jagged scar tissue running up his exposed right bicep. You have shattered your own vessel time and time again, she murmured, a genuine note of incredulity in her voice. You have suffered unimaginable agony. For what? For those peasants in the snow? Why? Izuku looked at her. Despite the demonic horns, despite the blood magic, he saw something in her eyes. She genuinely didn't understand. To her, sacrifice without gain was a foreign concept. The symbol of peace within him, the core that All Might had nurtured, straightened up, even if his physical body couldn't. Because they needed help, Izuku said simply, his green eyes meeting her golden ones without fear. It's what a hero does. Meddling where you don't belong is the essence of being a hero. Lilith stared at him in silence for a long, heavy moment. The air in the tent seemed to grow perfectly still. Then she threw her head back and laughed. It was a rich, dark sound that sent shivers down Izuku's spine. It wasn't mocking. It was a laugh of pure, delighted amusement. You are a magnificent anomaly, Izuku Midoriya, Lilith said, her golden eyes shining as she looked back down at him. A creature of pure light in a world drowning in shadow. You are weak, broken, and entirely ignorant of the harsh realities of this universe. She leaned down until her face was inches from his. He could smell the myrrh and blood radiating from her skin. But I can fix that, she whispered, her voice dropping to a seductive, terrifying purr. Rest now, little hero. When you are healed, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about the fate of this world. Lilith turned and swept out of the tent, the flaps closing behind her, leaving Izuku alone in the flickering candlelight. Izuku let his head fall back against the pillows, staring up at the dark fabric of the ceiling. His body was broken, his quirk was drained, and he was trapped in an alien world with a demon queen who seemed far too interested in him. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, shaky breath. I'm not in Japan anymore, he thought, clenching his left fist. But wherever I am, people still need saving. He just had to figure out how to save them, and perhaps, how to save the terrifying woman with the blood-red wings who had just claimed him. The passage of time in the fractured peaks was difficult to measure. The sun rarely pierced the perpetual canopy of iron-gray clouds, leaving the world in a state of eternal, bruised twilight. For Izuku Midoriya, the first few days in this alien world were a haze of fever dreams, agonizing pain, and forced recovery. He was kept in the opulent, dimly lit tent. His caretaker was not the terrifying, horned woman who called herself mother, but a pale, gaunt man named Elias. Elias moved with a rigid, scholarly exactness, his face a mask of veiled contempt. He dressed Izuku's shattered right arm with strange, foul-smelling poultices that stung like acid but accelerated the knitting of bone and muscle at a rate that rivaled Recovery Girl's quirk. Izuku spent his waking hours analyzing his situation, his mind retreating to the familiar comfort of his muttering habit. The atmospheric pressure is slightly heavier here, implying a different planetary mass or atmospheric composition, Izuku whispered to himself one evening, staring at the ceiling as his left hand tapped a rapid, rhythmic beat against his thigh. The magic, or quirk equivalent, functions on entirely different laws of thermodynamics. That spike of crystallized blood defied the conservation of mass. If I can't access the core stockpile of One for All, my base output is capped at 5, maybe 8%. The vestiges are completely silent. Is the dimensional barrier blocking them, or did the physical strain of the United States of Smash sever our connection? If it's the latter, I'm functionally quirkless again, save for the residual embers. Your incessant whispering is grating on my nerves, boy. Izuku snapped his mouth shut. From the darkest corner of the tent, the shadows seemed to bleed together, coalescing into the towering, majestic form of Lilith. She had been doing this for days. Appearing silently, observing him with those ancient, calculating golden eyes. She moved like a predator, graceful, silent, and exuding an aura of absolute dominance. Every time she entered the room, danger sense would hum, not with an acute warning of an attack, but with a dull, heavy pressure, like standing at the bottom of the ocean. I am sorry, Izuku stammered, his cheeks flushing pink. The sheer physical presence of the demoness was overwhelming, and despite his battle experience, he was still an awkward teenager at heart. It's a habit. It helps me organize my thoughts. Lilith glided across the carpets, the blood-red petals of her wings leaving a fading trail behind her. She stopped at the foot of his bed, crossing her arms. And what thoughts occupy the mind of a broken child from another world? She asked, her voice a silken purr. Do you mourn your home? Do you weep for the world you left behind? Izuku's gaze dropped to his bandaged hands. He thought of his mother, crying in their apartment. He thought of Uraraka, of Ada, of Todoroki, of All Might. A profound, suffocating ache bloomed in his chest. Yes, Izuku answered softly, but firmly. I miss them. I failed to stop the villain in my world without sacrificing myself. I left them behind. He looked back up, his green eyes locking onto hers. The sorrow was there, but it was anchored by an unbreakable foundation of resolve. But I'm alive. And as long as I'm alive, I can't just lie here. There are people out there who need help. Lilith stared at him. Elias, standing near the tent flap, let out a scoff of derision. Help, Lilith repeated, the word tasting foul on her tongue. She stepped closer, leaning over the bed until her face was inches from his. The scent of myrrh and ancient blood washed over him. You protected that woman in the snow. You shattered your own vessel to save a creature that would have perished to the elements within a week regardless. Do you believe this makes you noble? It makes me a hero, Izuku said, shrinking back slightly but refusing to break eye contact. It makes you a fool, Lilith corrected smoothly. She straightened up. You possess a power that I have never felt. A raw, kinetic energy that lacks the taint of the high heavens or the burning hells. Yet you squander it on the weak. You shield the maggots from the birds, delaying the inevitable and calling it a victory. Izuku frowned, his brow furrowing. A life is a life. It's not my place, or anyone's, to decide who deserves to live and who deserves to die just because they're weak. Lilith's golden eyes narrowed. To her, this boy was a paradox. In Sanctuary, power was the only currency. Angels hoarded it to enforce order. Demons hoarded it to enforce chaos. Humans begged for it to survive. Yet this boy, who possessed the power to shatter mountains, viewed himself as a servant to the lowest dregs of existence. It was infuriating. And deeply, deeply fascinating. She needed to break him. Not physically. His physical resilience was already proven. She needed to break his spirit. If she could shatter his ridiculous, infantile morality, she could mold that pure, uncorrupted willpower into the ultimate weapon to conquer Sanctuary. Your arm is sufficiently healed for travel, Lilith declared, turning her back to him. Rise, Izuku Midoriya. You wish to understand this world? You wish to be its hero? Come, let me show you what it is you have sworn to protect. The cold of the fractured peaks was brutal, but Lilith provided him with a heavy, fur-lined cloak that blocked the worst of the chill. Underneath, he wore a simple dark tunic and trousers provided by Elias. His right arm was still bound, tucked safely against his chest. Lilith did not walk. She glided inches above the snow, an imposing beacon of crimson against the bleak white landscape. Izuku trudged behind her, his iron-soled boots, which Elias had miraculously repaired, crunching heavily in the snow. Tell me of your world, little spark, Lilith commanded without looking back as they traversed the treacherous mountain pass. It's a society of superhumans, Izuku panted slightly, adjusting his pace to keep up. About 80% of the population has a quirk, a unique genetic ability. Because of this, society had to adapt. The profession of hero was created to combat those who used their quirks for evil. We protect the peace. A society built on inherent inequality, thinly veiled by laws, Lilith mused. And what happens to those who are born without this quirk? Izuku flinched, the old, deep-seated pain of his childhood flaring. We are looked down upon. We're considered fragile. Obsolete. Ah, Lilith smiled, a cruel, knowing curve of her lips. So your world is not so different from mine. The weak are trodden upon, and the strong dictate the truth. No! Izuku argued, his voice ringing clearly over the howling wind. That's why heroes exist. We use our strength to protect the vulnerable. The greatest hero of my world, All Might, he smiled to show everyone that no matter how dark things got, they were safe. Strength isn't meant for subjugation. It's meant for service. Lilith stopped at the edge of a massive cliff. She turned to face him, the wind whipping her dark hair and blood-red wings around her imposing form. Look upon Sanctuary, Izuku, she commanded, gesturing to the sprawling, dark valleys below. Izuku stepped to the edge. The view was breathtakingly bleak. Jagged mountains pierced the sky, while dense, dead forests choked the valleys. In the distance, he could see the faint, flickering lights of isolated settlements, huddled together like frightened animals in the dark. This world was not born of nature, Lilith began, her voice echoing with ancient weight. It was forged in secret. Long ago, the high heavens and the burning hells were locked in the eternal conflict, a war with no end, no victory, and no meaning. I, the daughter of hatred, and an archangel named Inarius, grew weary of the slaughter. We stole the World Stone, an artifact of unimaginable power, and created this realm. A refuge. Izuku listened, his hero notes brain rapidly cataloging the lore. Angels and demons. A literal war of divine and infernal beings. She is a progenitor of this world. We made it, Lilith continued, a hint of disgust now tainting her voice. Angel and demon. From our union came humanity. The Nephilim. Your ancestors, boy. They possessed the blood of both realms, and because of it, they held the potential to surpass both angels and demons. That sounds amazing, Izuku breathed, looking at the distant villages. It was, Lilith snapped, her golden eyes flashing with sudden fury. The temperature around them plummeted. But Inarius and the other renegades grew terrified of their own children. They saw the Nephilim's power and feared it. They tuned the World Stone to siphon humanity's strength, generation after generation, turning gods into the sniveling, mortal sheep you see today. And when I tried to stop them, when I slaughtered the renegades to protect my children, Inarius banished me to the void. Izuku's breath caught. He looked at the terrifying demoness, the monstrous horns, the aura of blood. For the first time, danger sense didn't hum with a warning of violence. It hummed with profound, agonizing grief. They have been left to rot, Lilith whispered, her gaze returning to the valleys. The heavens demand their unquestioning obedience, and offer no salvation. The hells seek to torture and consume them. And humanity? They weep. They pray. They slaughter each other over scraps of food and false dogmas. They are wretched, sinful creatures. She turned to Izuku, her expression hardening into a mask of ruthless pragmatism. You cannot save them with smiles and servitude, Izuku. They are too far gone for peace. The only way to save Sanctuary is to purge the weak, awaken the dormant Nephilim blood in those who survive, and forge an army strong enough to crush both heaven and hell. By slaughtering the innocent, Izuku said, his voice trembling slightly, not from cold, but from anger. By acting just like the villains who tried to destroy my world. Lilith's eyes flared. In a blur of motion, she crossed the distance between them. Her large, cold hand clamped around Izuku's throat. She didn't squeeze hard enough to crush his windpipe, but she lifted him effortlessly off his feet, holding him over the precipice. Do not compare me to the petty tyrants of your realm, boy, she hissed, her voice vibrating with dark magic. I am the mother of this world. Everything I do for their survival. Izuku kicked his legs, his hands coming up to grip her wrist. He couldn't pry her fingers away, but he didn't look away. His green eyes blazed with that same, infuriatingly pure light. If you kill them, just to make them strong. Izuku gasped out, then you're not saving them. You're just proving you're a monster. Lilith stared at him. She searched his eyes for fear, for the instinct to beg for his life. She found none. She found only pity. He pities me, she realized, a shockwave of genuine disbelief rattling her core. This broken mortal child is dangling over an abyss in the grip of a prime evil's daughter, and he is pitying me. With a frustrated sneer, she dropped him. Izuku collapsed into the snow, coughing and gasping for air, rubbing his bruised throat. I will show you, Lilith declared, stepping over him. I will show you the true nature of the creatures you wish to protect. And when you see their depravity, your naive ideals will shatter. Lilith did not walk this time. She grabbed Izuku by his uninjured shoulder, her wings flared, and the world dissolved into a sickening rush of crimson magic and shadow. When Izuku's vision cleared, he dropped to his hands and knees, retching bile into the dirt. The dimensional travel felt like being pulled inside out. Stand, Lilith commanded. Izuku wiped his mouth and staggered to his feet. They were no longer in the snowy mountains. They stood at the edge of a muddy, impoverished village surrounded by dead swampland. The stench of rot, disease, and unwashed bodies was overpowering. Lilith cast a subtle illusion over them, rendering them functionally invisible to the mortal eye. She guided Izuku into the heart of the village. It was a nightmare of human misery. People with sunken eyes and skeletal frames lay in the mud. Izuku watched in horror as a man violently beat another over a moldy loaf of bread, leaving the loser bleeding out in the dirt, while the village ignored them. Look, Lilith whispered in his ear. Desperation breeds cruelty. They moved to the town square. Here, A group of heavily armored knights bearing the golden sunburst of the Cathedral of Light stood upon a wooden platform. In front of them, bound in chains, were 3 villagers, a man, a woman, and a young boy no older than 12. These sinners have been found guilty of harboring dark artifacts. The lead knight bellowed, his voice ringing with self-righteous zealotry. By the light of Father Anarius, they are condemned to burn. No! Please! The woman screamed, tears streaming through the grime on her face. It was just an old carved stone. We didn't know what it was. We were just trying to sell it for food. Silence, heretic! The knight struck her across the face with the pommel of his sword. Izuku's blood boiled. He took a step forward, the embers of one for all involuntarily sparking around his left fist. Lilith's hand clamped onto his shoulder, holding him in place with preternatural strength. Watch, she commanded. This is the justice of the angels you so highly regard. The knights tied the crying family to wooden stakes. They piled dry brush around their feet. The villagers watched, their faces a mixture of terror and twisted, apathetic relief that it wasn't them. No one stepped forward. No one protested. They let it happen, Lilith whispered. They are cowards. They deserve the fire. A knight stepped forward with a blazing torch. Izuku didn't think. The same instinct that had moved his legs when Bakugo was captured by the sludge villain hijacked his nervous system. He didn't have one for all to shatter Lilith's grip. But he had his own momentum. He violently twisted his body, dislocating his own left shoulder with a sickening pop to slip out of her grasp. Lilith's eyes widened in genuine shock as the boy tore himself free, breaking his own body just to escape her hold. Izuku burst out of the illusion. Stop! His voice tore through the grim silence of the village square. The knights paused, turning to see a battered, scarred boy covered in faint, green sparks sprinting toward them. What in the light's name? The lead knight muttered, drawing his broadsword. Another heretic! Strike him down! Izuku ignored the pain in his dislocated shoulder and shattered right arm. He channeled the meager 5% of one for all into his legs. He launched himself into the air, leaping over the line of guards. He landed directly on the platform, placing himself between the executioners and the family. Step aside, boy, the lead knight sneered, raising his blade. Or burn with them. You're not heroes, Izuku growled, his eyes burning with an intense, emerald fire. You're just bullies with armor. The knight lunged, swinging the heavy broadsword at Izuku's neck. Izuku ducked beneath the blade. He couldn't punch. He couldn't use his arms at all. So, he improvised. He planted his hands on the ground, ignoring the searing agony in his shoulders, and unleashed a powerful, double-legged mule kick directly into the knight's chest plate. The iron soles of his boots dented the heavy steel armor. The knight wheezed, the air driven from his lungs, and stumbled backward off the platform, crashing into the mud. The other 4 knights drew their weapons, charging the platform. Izuku stood his ground, breathing heavily. He was out of options. He was defenseless. But he didn't take a single step backward. He spread his arms wide, shielding the family behind him. I will not let them die. Suddenly, the sky darkened. The torches sputtered and died, casting the square into gloom. A heavy, oppressive silence fell over the village. The knights froze, their weapons trembling in their hands. The villagers fell to their knees, weeping in pure terror. Lilith stepped out of the shadows. She dropped the illusion, revealing her full, terrifying majesty. Her blood-red wings flared to their maximum span, casting long, monstrous shadows across the square. Her golden eyes burned with an inner, infernal fire. You lay hands upon what is mine. Lilith's voice was a soft, deadly whisper that echoed in the minds of everyone present. The lead knight scrambled to his feet, his face pale with horror. Demon! The daughter of hatred. Lilith raised a single finger. The knight didn't even have time to scream as his blood violently boiled within his veins. He exploded into a mist of red, his armor clattering emptily to the muddy ground. The remaining knights dropped their weapons and ran, screaming into the swamp. Lilith did not pursue them. She let them carry the terror of her return to the cathedral. Lilith turned to the villagers. They cowered, burying their faces in the mud. She looked at the tied-up family, then, finally, her gaze settled on Izuku. The boy was panting, his left arm hanging limply from the dislocated joint, his right arm bound. He looked pathetic. He looked entirely broken, yet he hadn't flinched when she revealed herself. He was looking at her, and the danger sense in his mind was piecing the puzzle together. You see now? Lilith demanded, her voice echoing over the silent village. She gestured sharply to the cowering peasants. They are pathetic. They would have watched that family burn to save their own miserable skins. This is humanity, Izuku. This is the sin inherent in their blood. They cannot be saved by kindness. They must be ruled by fear, forged in blood, and forced to be strong. Izuku stared at her. He looked at the cowering villagers. He looked at the family he had just protected. Then, he let out a long, slow breath. You're wrong. Lilith froze. Her wings twitched. Excuse me? Izuku took a step toward her. He wasn't radiating power. He was a battered teenager in torn clothes. But the sheer weight of his presence, the absolute conviction in his soul, felt heavier than a prime evil. They didn't stop it because they're sinners, Izuku said, his voice quiet, yet it carried clearly. They didn't stop it because they're terrified. They have no power. They've been beaten down by demons, oppressed by angels, and starved by the land. When you live in constant, suffocating fear, survival becomes your only instinct. He took another step closer to Lilith. She found herself, inexplicably, holding her breath. In my world before I got my quirk, I was just like them, Izuku continued, his eyes locked onto hers. I was weak. I was bullied. I was told I was worthless every single day, and the people who watched it happen did nothing, because they were afraid of becoming targets themselves. It wasn't because they were evil, it was because they didn't have a symbol to show them how to be brave. Izuku stopped a few feet from the towering demoness. He looked up into her ancient, golden eyes. You look at them and see failure, Izuku said softly. You see weakness that needs to be purged. He raised his unbroken, dislocated left arm. He winced in pain, but he reached out. To the absolute shock of everyone present, the mortal boy laid his hand gently against Lilith's cheek. Lilith's breath hitched. A shockwave of pure, empathetic warmth flooded her system, bypassing all her demonic defenses. But I look at you, Izuku whispered, and I don't see a monster. I see a mother who is grieving. Lilith felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. Not physical pain. Emotional agony. Centuries of repressed sorrow, the loss of her first Nephilim children, the betrayal of Anarius, the endless centuries in the void. You hate the heavens and the hells for what they did to your children, Izuku said, his thumb gently brushing against her pale skin. You want to make them strong so they can never be hurt again, but you're hurting them to do it. You've convinced yourself that love requires cruelty. But it doesn't. Love requires patience. It requires hope. Tears, hot and unfamiliar, pricked at the corners of Lilith's eyes. She slapped his hand away, stumbling backward as if he had burned her. Silence! She hissed, her voice cracking. You know nothing of my pain, mortal. You know nothing of the burdens I bear. I know what it's like to want to save people so badly that you destroy yourself to do it, Izuku countered, gesturing to his own shattered body. You're destroying your own soul, Lilith. You're becoming the very thing you hate to protect them. Lilith glared at him, her chest heaving. The air around her crackled with dark, volatile magic. She could kill him right now. With a single thought, she could turn this impertinent, painfully perceptive child into ash. But she couldn't, because beneath the anger, beneath the demonic pride, a tiny, buried fragment of her soul, the part that had once genuinely loved humanity before the eternal conflict poisoned it, was weeping. He had seen through her. He hadn't looked at her monstrous form and seen a devil to be slain. He had looked at the daughter of hatred and seen a grieving mother who needed to be saved. You are arrogant, Lilith whispered, her voice devoid of its usual commanding boom. I'm a hero, Izuku replied simply. And I'm going to save this world. But I can't do it alone. He held out his uninjured, albeit dislocated, left hand toward her. You have the power. You have the knowledge. You love them, Lilith, deep down. I know you do, Izuku said, offering her a genuine, albeit exhausted, smile. Help me. Let me show you my way. We don't have to cull them. We can teach them. We can protect them. We can make Sanctuary strong without losing our humanity. Lilith stared at his outstretched hand. It was the most absurd, ridiculous proposition in the history of existence. A mortal, quirkless boy from another dimension offering a partnership to the Queen of the Succubi, the creator of Sanctuary. Yet, as she looked into his eyes, she saw no deception. She saw only a blinding, absolute certainty. He truly believed he could redeem her. He truly believed they could save the world without bathing it in blood. A complex flurry of emotions swirled within her. Amusement. Frustration. Respect. And a deep, terrifying affection. He was a puzzle she could not solve, a light she could not snuff out. If she could not break his spirit, perhaps she could merge it with hers. Lilith slowly reached out. Her large, pale hand engulfed his much smaller one. Her skin was freezing. His was burning with feverish warmth. You are a foolish, naive child, Izuku Midoriya, Lilith said softly, a genuine, albeit dark, smile returning to her lips. Your ideals will shatter against the anvil of this world's cruelty. I've been told that before, Izuku replied, his grip firm. I'm pretty stubborn. Very well, Lilith purred, pulling him slightly closer. We shall travel together. You shall be my experiment. You may attempt to save these wretched creatures your way. But know this, little hero. Her golden eyes flashed with a predatory glint. When your way fails, when you realize that blood is the only language this universe understands, you will do things my way. And you will belong to me. Izuku swallowed hard, a shiver running down his spine at the possessive undertone in her voice. But he nodded. Deal. Lilith let go of his hand. She turned to the villagers, who were still cowering in the mud. Rejoice, children of Sanctuary, Lilith declared, her voice echoing with dark majesty. For a new light walks among you. And I shall be its shadow. She turned back to Izuku. Now hold still, boy. I grow weary of looking at your broken joints. Before Izuku could react, Lilith stepped forward, grabbed his dislocated left shoulder, and with a vicious, fluid motion, violently snapped the joint back into place. Izuku let out a strangled yelp, his knees buckling as a fresh wave of agonizing pain washed over him. He slumped against her. Lilith caught him effortlessly against her chest, her arm wrapping around his waist. To anyone else, it looked like a monstrous demon capturing prey, but as Izuku rested against her, he felt a strange, terrifying sense of security. Rest, Izuku, Lilith murmured, the blood-red petals of her wings folding around them both like a protective shroud. We have much work to do. As the darkness of dimensional travel claimed him once more, Izuku Midoriya realized two things with absolute certainty. First, saving this world was going to be the hardest challenge of his life. Second, the daughter of hatred was much, much more complicated than she appeared. And if he wanted to save Sanctuary, he had to save her first. The weeks that followed Izuku Midoriya's induction into the dark, sweeping crusade of the daughter of hatred were a grueling exercise in ideological warfare. They did not fight with fists or magic, not against each other, at least. Their battles were fought in the quiet moments between the slaughter. They were fought over crackling campfires in the desolate highlands of Skosklin, in the ruined, rain-slicked courtyards of forgotten Horadric monasteries, and in the muddy, disease-ridden streets of Sanctuary's dying villages. Izuku's body was healing. Thanks to Elias's potent, if agonizing, poultices and the residual, passive regenerative properties of one for all's embers, his shattered right arm was no longer bound to his chest. He still wore a thick leather brace, and attempting to channel anything above 5% of his power sent a blinding spike of agony up his bicep, but he was combat capable. He had adapted, relying heavily on shoot style, his acrobatic agility, and the cautious deployment of Black Whip. He needed every ounce of that adaptability, because traveling with Lilith was a descent into a world of unmitigated brutality. Lilith did not march with an army. She moved like a whisper through the continent, a dark rumor that stirred the latent, sinful blood of humanity. Where she walked, the repressed desires of the peasantry flared into violent life. She sought to strip away the suffocating dogma of the Cathedral of Light, believing that only by embracing their true, unrestrained natures could humanity find the strength to survive the coming wars. But Izuku refused to let her methods stand unchallenged. You are a parasite upon your own potential, Lilith hissed one evening, gliding through the muddy thoroughfare of a fishing hamlet in the swampy expanse of Huizer. The village was in a state of chaotic upheaval. Lilith's presence had incited the local fishers to overthrow their cruel, cathedral-appointed magistrate. But instead of a peaceful transition, the villagers, drunk on sudden power and Lilith's maddening aura, had dragged the magistrate and his family into the town square, preparing to drown them in the bog. Izuku had immediately intervened. Moving as a blur of green lightning, he had severed their ropes with a localized flick of Black Whip, which in this universe had manifested not as a quirk, but as tendrils of ethereal, shadowy green energy that the locals mistook for soul magic. He had stood between the mob and the family, absorbing the blows of pitchforks and rusted swords against his iron-soled boots and forearms, refusing to strike back. He had stood there until the mob, exhausted and utterly baffled by a boy who refused to hurt them but could not be moved, finally dropped their weapons. Now, he walked beside the towering demoness, nursing a fresh cut on his cheek. They were going to murder children, Lilith, Izuku said, his voice tight but unwavering. He wiped a drop of blood from his jaw. The magistrate was corrupt. He deserved a trial, or imprisonment, but his family? They were innocent. If you let your followers slaughter innocents just to prove they are strong, you're no better than the tyrants you want to replace. Innocence is a luxury of the protected, Lilith replied, her golden eyes flashing with a mixture of irritation and that ever-present, terrifying fascination. Her blood-red wings draped elegantly behind her, avoiding the mud. In the eternal conflict, there are no non-combatants. Heaven will purge them for possessing demonic blood. Hell will consume them for their angelic lineage. If they cannot shed the blood of their oppressors, even the offspring of those oppressors, they will hesitate when the true enemy arrives. Hesitation is death. And what happens when the true enemy is defeated? Izuku challenged, stopping in the middle of the path and turning to face her. The height difference was staggering, forcing him to crane his neck, but his emerald eyes burned with absolute conviction. What happens when you win, Lilith? You'll be left with a world of murderers, a world where the strong take whatever they want from the weak. That's not a refuge. That's just a different kind of hell. Lilith stared down at him. The wind howled off the bogs, whipping his messy green hair around his scarred face. She opened her mouth to rebuke him, to remind him of his place, to crush his naive ideals with the sheer weight of her ancient wisdom. But the words died in her throat, because the mob in the town square had not turned to madness after Izuku had stopped them. Lilith had watched from the shadows as the boy, bleeding and bruised, had spoken to the villagers. He hadn't used fear. He hadn't used her intoxicating blood magic. He had simply looked at them with an expression of such profound, heartbreaking disappointment that the villagers had wept in shame. He had reminded them of their humanity. He had told them that true strength was having the power to kill, and choosing to forgive. They had listened to him. Not out of terror, but out of reverence. You are an enigma, Izuku Midoriya, Lilith murmured, her tone softening, much to her own internal frustration. She reached out, her pale, long-fingered hand gently cupping his cheek, her thumb wiping away a smear of dirt near his fresh cut. You bleed for creatures that would betray you for a copper coin. You handicap your immense power to coddle the fragile. I told you, Izuku whispered, leaning into her touch just a fraction of an inch, a subconscious gesture of exhaustion that sent an alien thrill through Lilith's chest. I'm a hero, she tested the word again. The peasants here do not know that word. Do you know what they are calling you, in the taverns and the alleys? Izuku blinked, pulling back slightly. No, the Emerald Seraph, Lilith said, a dark smile curling her dark lips. They believe you are an angel. But not an angel of the high heavens, for you lack their sterile arrogance. They believe you are something new. A harbinger of a different kind of salvation. Izuku's face flushed a deep crimson, and he rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking like the awkward teenager he was. As Seraph? That's a bit much. I'm just Deku. Lilith let out a soft, melodic laugh. Deku. A name of weakness transformed into a mantle of strength. I find it fitting. She turned, resuming her graceful glide down the path. Come, my little Seraph. We make for the fortress of Corvala. If we are to test your philosophy of protection, we will need walls. The hounds of hell have caught our scent. The fortress they claimed was not Corvala itself, but an abandoned, crumbling citadel nestled in the treacherous, wind-swept crags of the fractured peaks, known locally as the Keep of the Pale Sun. It had once been a Horadric outpost, long since abandoned to the snow and the Katsra, Lilith's followers, a massive, ragtag congregation of disillusioned peasants, rogue knights, and dark scholars, flooded into the keep, beginning the arduous process of fortifying it. Izuku threw himself into the work. He didn't sit in the war room with Elias and Lilith. He was out in the courtyards. He used 5% of 1 for all to haul massive slabs of fallen masonry, rebuilding the outer walls with a speed that left the mortar workers gaping in awe. He used Blackwhip to safely lower heavy timber beams for the roofs. He sat with the children by the campfires, using tiny sparks of green electricity to conjure shapes in the air, making them laugh in a world that had forgotten the sound of joy. He was exhausting himself. One evening, deep in the bowels of the keep, Lilith found him. Izuku was slumped against the cold stone wall of what used to be a library. His eyes closed, his breathing ragged. The constant, ambient dread of sanctuary, combined with the physical exertion of building and the agonizing restriction of his quirk, was wearing him down to the bone. He didn't hear her approach. He only felt the sudden, intoxicating warmth as a heavy fur cloak was draped over his shivering shoulders. Izuku's eyes fluttered open. Lilith was kneeling in front of him. In the dim light of a single torch, her features seemed softer, the harsh, demonic edges blurred by the shadows. "You push yourself to the breaking point for the mundane," Lilith scolded softly, her golden eyes scanning his pale, scarred face. "You possess the power to sunder mountains, yet you use it to stack stones and entertain whelps." "If I don't help them stack the stones," Izuku mumbled, his eyelids heavy, "the walls won't hold. And if I don't entertain the whelps, what's the point of the walls at all?" Lilith paused. She looked at him, truly looked at him. In her long, immortal life, she had taken many lovers. She had manipulated kings, seduced angels, and commanded the fanatical worship of millions. But every single one of them had wanted something from her: power, knowledge, salvation, or pleasure. They had looked at her with a mixture of lust, greed, and terror. Izuku Midoriya wanted nothing from her. He didn't fear her, despite knowing exactly what she was capable of. He didn't worship her. He challenged her. He frustrated her to the brink of violence. Yet when he looked at her, those impossibly pure green eyes held a deep, unyielding empathy. He saw her pain. He saw the grieving mother beneath the demonic exterior. And, entirely against her nature, Lilith found herself desperately wanting to protect him. Not as a tool. Not as a weapon. But as a treasure. She reached out, her fingers gently threading through his wild, messy green curls. Izuku sighed, leaning his head against her palm, too tired to muster his usual teenage embarrassment. "You are so small," Lilith whispered, a profound sense of wonder in her ancient voice. "So fragile. Yet your spirit casts a shadow larger than the prime evils themselves." "I'm not small," Izuku protested weakly, though he didn't pull away. "I'm average height for my age." Lilith smiled, a genuine, warm expression that made her breathtakingly beautiful. "Rest, Izuku. The storm is coming, and I will need your light when the darkness breaks upon our walls." The warning came 2 days later. Elias burst into the war room, his usual composed demeanor shattered, his pale face slick with sweat. Izuku and Lilith were bent over a map of the region, arguing over supply lines, Izuku advocating for rationing, Lilith advocating for raiding nearby cathedral strongholds. "Mother!" Elias gasped, dropping to one knee. "Scouts report a massive host moving through the eastern pass." "It is not the Cathedral of Light." Lilith straightened up, her aura instantly flaring into a terrifying, oppressive weight that made the candles flicker and die. "Hell, yes," Elias swallowed hard. "Banners of rust and bone. It is a vanguard of Asmodon, the Lord of Sin. Led by Vraksh, the corpse grinder. A lesser evil of immense cruelty. They number in the thousands. Demons of gluttony, succubi, and siege beasts. They march to wipe you out before your power can consolidate." Izuku felt the blood drain from his face. "Thousands?" he whispered. He looked at Lilith. "We only have a few hundred fighters. Mostly militia with pitchforks and stolen swords. They'll be slaughtered. They will fight, and they will die for me, Lilith said coldly, her pragmatic ruthlessness instantly returning. It is their purpose. Vraksh is a fool to challenge me in my own domain, but his forces will overwhelm the walls through sheer attrition. She turned to Izuku. You will remain in the inner sanctum. You are not at full strength. I cannot risk my most valuable asset being torn apart by Asmodee's rabble. Izuku's eyes widened. What? No. I'm fighting. I'm a hero, Lilith. I don't hide behind walls while people die for me. You will do as I command. Lilith's voice boomed, vibrating with demonic authority. The very stone of the keep trembled. You are injured. You cannot draw out your full power without shattering your vessel. If Vraksh gets his hands on you, he will consume your soul and absorb your light. Izuku slammed his unbroken left fist onto the stone table, the iron soul of his gauntlet cracking the ancient masonry. Green lightning violently erupted around his body, casting the dark room in a brilliant, emerald glow. I don't care. Izuku shouted back, entirely unbowed by her terrifying display. I am Izuku Midoriya, the successor of One for All. I promise to protect these people, and I am not going to let them die just because I'm not at 100%. If you want to stop me, you'll have to break my legs. Lilith stared at him. The air crackled with tension, the dark magic of the demoness clashing against the pure kinetic willpower of the hero. Elias cowered in the corner, expecting Lilith to strike the boy down for his insolence. Instead, Lilith's aura receded. A slow, deeply predatory, and incredibly proud smile spread across her face. Stubborn, foolish child, she purred, her golden eyes burning with a dark thrill. Very well. But you stay by my side. If you die, I will march into the burning hells and drag your soul back myself. Izuku nodded sharply, the green lightning fading to a steady, resolute hum. Deal. The sky above the keep of the pale sun turned a sickly, bruised purple as the demonic host of Vraksh arrived. Standing on the battlements, Izuku looked out over the sea of horrors. It was a nightmare rendered in flesh and steel. Towering, bloated demons carrying massive cleavers marched alongside skittering, multi-limbed monstrosities. The air reeked of sulfur and rotting meat. In the center of the horde stood Vraksh, a colossal beast of crimson scales, bone armor, and a maw that dripped with acidic saliva. The human defenders on the walls were trembling. Many wept. They clutched their crude weapons, knowing they were staring at their own brutal demise. Lilith stood at the center of the battlements, resplendent in armor of dark iron and crystallized blood. Her wings flared wide, a beacon of terrifying majesty. She raised her hand, preparing to unleash a wave of blood magic to inspire a mindless, berserker frenzy in her human troops. It was the only way they would fight without breaking. Before she could cast the spell, Izuku stepped to the edge of the parapet. He didn't have armor. He wore only his black undersuit, heavily repaired with leather and chain mail, and his battered red boots. He took a deep breath, drawing upon the embers of One for All. He couldn't use it for a massive attack, but he could use it to amplify his voice. Listen to me. Izuku's voice boomed across the battlements, echoing over the demonic roars below. The defenders turned to him. Even the demons seemed to pause, confused by the singular, purely human voice cutting through the din. They want you to be afraid. Izuku shouted, his green eyes glowing like twin stars in the gloom. They want you to believe that you are weak. That humanity is nothing more than fodder for their war. But look beside you. The defenders looked at each other. Peasants, knights, scholars, thieves, you built these walls together. You protected each other. You are not meat for the slaughter. Izuku raised his left fist, the emerald lightning flaring, bright and warm and full of unyielding hope. You are the people of Sanctuary. And today, we do not fight for heaven. We do not fight for hell. We fight for each other. A stunned silence hung in the air for a fraction of a second. Then, a roar erupted from the human defenders. It wasn't the maddened, blood-crazed scream of Lilith's cultists. It was a roar of defiance. It was the sound of a people who had finally found something worth believing in. For the Seraph! For the Mother! Lilith watched him, utterly spellbound. He had done it again. Without a single drop of magic, without a single threat, he had forged an army of cowards into a legion of lions. Open the gates, Lilith commanded softly. Her eyes locked on Izuku. The heavy iron portcullis shrieked as it was raised. Shall we, mother? Izuku asked, glancing back at her with a fierce, determined smile. We shall, my seraph, Lilith replied, drawing a long, wicked blade composed entirely of hardened blood. They leaped from the battlements together. The impact of their landing shattered the ground in front of the gates. Izuku hit the earth like a meteor, channeling 8% of one for all into his legs. A shockwave of green kinetic energy ripped outward, throwing the front lines of the demonic vanguard into the air. Lilith landed beside him with terrifying grace, her wings snapping forward to unleash a torrent of razor-sharp blood petals that shredded the falling demons into mist. Full call! Izuku roared, the green lightning enveloping him completely. He moved like a pinball of absolute destruction. He couldn't punch with his right arm, so he became a master of kicks and grapples. He darted between the massive legs of a siege beast, launching himself upward to deliver a devastating Manchester smash to its jaw, the sheer kinetic force snapping its neck with a sound like a cannon. But Izuku was mortal. The sheer numbers of the horde began to press in. A massive demon with a rusted halberd swung at Izuku's blind side. Izuku's danger sense flared, but his legs, burning with the strain of OFA, couldn't move fast enough. A spike of solid blood erupted from the ground, impaling the demon through the eye. Lilith was there. She didn't fight like a warrior, she fought like a force of nature. She waved her hand, and the blood of the fallen demons on the battlefield boiled, erupting into geysers of crimson magic that melted through armor and flesh alike. Behind you! Izuku yelled, sensing a group of stealth demons leaping from the shadows toward Lilith's back. He didn't wait for her to turn. 5 tendrils of black whip erupted from his left arm. They lashed out like vipers, wrapping around the demons' throats. Izuku yanked his arm back, utilizing his incredible core strength to swing the demons through the air, smashing them brutally into the stone walls of the keep. They fell into a rhythm. A perfect, terrifying synergy of light and shadow, of kinetic force and ancient magic. When Izuku was overwhelmed by numbers, Lilith would unleash a blood surge, a massive nova of crimson energy that cleared the field, perfectly leaving Izuku untouched in the eye of the storm. When Lilith was targeted by heavily armored juggernauts resistant to magic, Izuku would vault off her shoulders, utilizing her blood spikes as platforms to deliver devastating, armor-crushing kicks directly to their weak points. It was a dance of absolute carnage. Emerald lightning and crimson petals painted the battlefield in strokes of violent art. Puny mortals! Arrogant whore of Venarius! The ground shook as Vrach, the corpse grinder, finally waded into the fray. The lesser evil was the size of a small building, wielding a massive, jagged cleaver that radiated a sickening aura of decay. He is mine, Lilith hissed, her eyes glowing with infernal fury as she prepared to take flight. No, Izuku said, breathing heavily, green sparks arcing off his sweat-drenched skin. He's ours. Lilith glanced at him, a thrill of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Very well. Break his guard, Seraph. I will take his head. Vrach charged, bringing his massive cleaver down in an arc meant to cleave them both in two. Izuku didn't dodge. He planted his feet. He couldn't use 100%. He couldn't use 50%. But he had something else. He had synergy. Lilith! A ramp! Izuku yelled. Lilith didn't hesitate. She slammed her hands into the earth. The blood soaking the battlefield converged, instantly crystallizing into a massive, sweeping ramp of solid, crimson glass that aimed directly at Vrach's chest. Izuku channeled 15% of one for all, the absolute maximum his bruised body could handle without breaking again. He sprinted up the blood ramp, moving so fast he was nothing but a streak of green light. Vrach roared, trying to adjust his swing, but Izuku was already airborne, vaulted high above the demon's head, shoot style. Izuku spun in the air, his iron-soled boot glowing like a miniature sun as the kinetic energy reached its apex. Texas smash! He brought his heel down directly onto the flat of Vrach's massive cleaver just as the demon raised it to block. The sheer, concentrated kinetic impact shattered the demonic weapon into 1,000 pieces. The shockwave forced the colossal demon to its knees, its arms broken under the pressure. Vrach looked up stunned. Lilith was already in the air, drifting down like an angel of death. She held her blade of hardened blood in both hands. With a single, graceful, and devastatingly powerful swing, she decapitated the lesser evil. Raksha's massive head hit the ground with a sickening thud. The battlefield went dead silent. The remaining demonic forces stared at the severed head of their warlord, then looked at the two figures standing over it. The towering, terrifying mother of blood, and the glowing, unbroken boy of light. Panic seized the horde. Without their leader, the demons broke ranks and fled, scattering into the crags and the wilderness, shrieking in terror. The siege was over. From the walls of the keep, the human defenders erupted into a cheer so deafening it shook the clouds. Izuku stood amidst the carnage, the green lightning finally fading from his body. The adrenaline crashed. The sheer agony of channeling 15% ripped through his muscles. His legs gave out. He didn't hit the ground. Lilith caught him. She held him against her, ignoring the blood and the grime. She looked down at him, her chest heaving. Izuku looked up at her, offering a weak, exhausted, but triumphant smile. "We did it," he whispered. Lilith stared at his smile. In that moment, a profound, world-altering epiphany struck the daughter of hatred. She had spent millennia trying to figure out how to save humanity. She had tried logic. She had tried fear. She had tried unleashing their darkest sins to make them strong. But it had always ended in chaos, betrayal, and madness. But this boy, this incredibly fragile, impossibly strong boy, he had the one thing she lacked. He had the light. He didn't just command their fear. He commanded their love. He inspired them to be better than their sinful nature. When she looked at the cheering humans on the walls, she didn't see the cowering, treacherous maggots she was used to. She saw Nephilim. Proud, unified, and strong, Izuku Midoriya was not just an anomaly. He was the key. He was the missing half of her grand design. He possessed the pure, incorruptible light that Anarius had always faked, and she realized, with a sudden, terrifying intensity, that she could never let him go. That evening, the keep of the Pale Sun was alive with celebration. The humans drank, sang, and tended to their wounded. Izuku was not among them. He sat by a roaring fire in the war room, his torso wrapped in fresh bandages, sipping a cup of warm, spice broth. He felt like he had been run over by a bullet train, but his heart felt lighter than it had since he arrived in Sanctuary. They had saved people. The heavy oak doors creaked open. Lilith entered, dismissing Elias and the guards with a sharp flick of her wrist. The doors closed, leaving the two of them entirely alone. Lilith had bathed. The grime of battle was gone. She wore a gown of breathtaking elegance, deep crimson silk that hugged her statuesque form, her horns polished and gleaming, her petal wings folded neatly behind her. She looked less like a warlord and more like an empress. She moved to the fireplace, standing beside Izuku's chair. She didn't speak for a long time, merely staring into the flames. "You fought beautifully today, Mother," Izuku said, breaking the silence, offering a respectful nod. "Do not call me that," Lilith said softly. Izuku blinked, confused. "What?" "But everyone. They call me Mother because I birthed their ancestors." Lilith turned to look at him, her golden eyes burning with an intensity that made danger sense give a strange, fluttering hum. "You are not of my blood, Izuku. You are not my child. You are my equal." Izuku's jaw dropped. "Equal? Lilith, I can barely use a fraction of my power right now. You're a literal god. Power is not merely the ability to destroy," Lilith said, stepping closer. She knelt gracefully beside his chair, bringing herself down to his eye level. The scent of myrrh and roses enveloped him. "Power is the ability to shape the world. Today, you shaped the hearts of humanity in a way I have failed to do for 3,000 years. She reached out, gently taking his unbroken left hand in hers. Her skin was cool, a stark contrast to the heat of the fire. "I have observed you, Izuku," she continued, her voice a mesmerizing, hypnotic purr. "I have tried to break your morality. I have tried to expose the ugliness of this world to taint your light. But you do not break. You absorb the darkness, and you return it as hope." Izuku swallowed hard, his heart hammering against his ribs. The proximity, the intensity of her gaze, it was overwhelming. "Lilith, what are you saying?" "I am saying that Sanctuary needs you," Lilith said, her grip on his hand tightening slightly. And I need you. Izuku's breath hitched. For millennia, this world was ruled by the Father of Light and the Mother of Blood. Lilith spoke, her words weaving a tapestry of ancient lore and profound ambition. And Nereus was a hypocrite. His light was sterile, arrogant, and cruel. But yours is warm. It is genuine. You proved today that fear can build a wall, but hope will make men die to defend it. She leaned closer, until he could feel the cool breath of her words against his face. We are two halves of the ultimate truth, Izuku. I am the pragmatic shadow that will slaughter the wolves. You are the blinding light that will guide the sheep to become wolves themselves. Together, we are the perfect equilibrium. Izuku's mind was spinning. You want us to lead together. As partners. No, Lilith corrected softly. Partnerships are political. They can be broken. They can be betrayed. She moved her other hand to cup his cheek, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. Her golden eyes searched his green ones, stripping away all his defenses. The people of Sanctuary revere symbolism, Lilith whispered. To truly unite them, to forge an unbreakable shield against heaven and hell, they must see that the light and the shadow are eternally bound, flesh to flesh, soul to soul. Izuku stopped breathing. His brilliant, analytical mind ground to a screeching halt. Izuku Midoriya, Lilith said, her voice dropping to a register of absolute, terrifying, and deeply intimate sincerity. I am asking you to stand at my side not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as my husband. I am proposing a union. The Father of Light, and the Mother of Sanctuary. Izuku stared at her. The crackle of the fireplace was the only sound in the room. Marriage. He was 17. He was from Japan. He wanted to go back to UA, finish his classes, and become the symbol of peace. Now, a 7-foot-tall demon queen was kneeling before him, offering him half a world and her hand in marriage. Lilith. Izuku stammered, his face flushed completely red. I'm a teenager. I'm mortal. You're immortal. You're a demon. This is crazy. This is salvation, Lilith countered, refusing to let him look away. You told me you wanted to save this world. You told me you wanted to stop me from slaughtering the innocent to make them strong. This is how you do it. Izuku paused. The flush on his face faded, replaced by the grim, analytical focus of the hero within. If I accept, Izuku said slowly, his voice trembling slightly, but his eyes resolute. I am your equal. That means I have a say. That means no more human sacrifices. No more torturing the innocent. No more ruling through absolute terror. It means, Lilith smiled, a genuine expression of profound respect, that my wrath will be tempered by your mercy. I will spare the innocent, because you ask it of me. I will allow you to build your academies, to teach them to be heroes, as long as they are strong enough to fight the prime evils. Izuku looked into her golden eyes. He saw the cunning of a demon, yes. But he also saw desperate, profound loneliness. He saw a woman who had fought a war for her children for thousands of years, entirely alone, and was finally asking for someone to help her carry the burden. He thought of the villagers in Huizer. He thought of the defenders on the wall. He thought of the world of Sanctuary, caught in a meat grinder of cosmic war. If he married her, he would be binding himself to a creature of darkness. But he would also be tethering that darkness, holding it back from consuming the world. He could be the symbol of peace here, on a scale All Might had never even imagined. He could save millions. Izuku Midoriya took a deep breath. He let go of his dream of returning to Japan. He let go of his past. He turned his hand over, intertwining his scarred, bruised fingers with the pale, elegant fingers of the daughter of hatred. Okay, Izuku whispered, his green eyes burning with the solemn, unbreakable vow of a hero. I accept. We'll save them, Lilith. Together. Lilith's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't truly believed he would say yes. Then, a look of profound, terrifying joy washed over her features. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his forehead. It was not a kiss of a predator claiming a prize. It was a kiss of genuine, reverent devotion. Together, Lilith murmured against his skin. My seraph. My husband. The flames in the hearth flared, turning a brilliant, harmonious mixture of emerald green and blood red, casting the dawn of a new era upon the walls of the keep.